we should all be lucky. We should all be lucky to have a space like Willie has for his layout.
Yeah.
It is really quite an amazing
Oh, yeah.
situation.
It was it was either that or join a club.
You have your own club, Willie.
Yeah, right. Yes.
Okay, I'm on. We're recording.
Okay.
Sorry for the interruption. I still have a bit of a learning curve on this Zoom business, but anyway, apparently I'm now hosting. Welcome. And Aaron, please continue.
Great, thank you. So first of all, question is, can everybody now see presentation?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So again, just want to say thank you because I am new to this group, and as you'll kind of see along the way, I'm relatively new to model railroading in general. So this has been kind of a rather quick, steep learning curve, but hopefully, take you a little bit through the journey that I've had over the last several years, going from thinking I'd love to have this basement empire to realizing there's not enough space and then there's never enough money and time to the point where I thought about, okay, modeling a single town and then realizing, there's reasons why maybe a single industry is the best way to go. So um, hopefully I put on a relatively decent show. So we'll see. Just as a quick overview, I'll go through who I am. The first version, which is the single town kind of idea for this Madison industrial subdivision, which is a freelanced version of what will be a CN division. And then the idea of a single food processor, which is named Prairie Girl Grains. It's named that because my partner is from Saskatchewan, so it kind of made sense to have the prairies as a part of that. Walk through the concept, the track plan, the current state of the layout, operations, and then some future goals I plan to implement, sometime in the next decade or so. Who knows how long it'll take. So I'm originally from the Buffalo, New York area. So this is where I out myself as an American who's moved to Canada for lots of reasons, but primarily because my partner is Canadian. I'm here in London, Ontario now. I had an early introduction to the hobby. So when I was young, as with many of us, my parents bought me what would be essentially the equivalent of a 4x8 oval worth of track and actually in hindsight, some pretty nice stuff. So some Athearn locomotives and some rolling stock. Um, but when I set that up and I enjoyed it around the table,
Sure.
because we actually set it up on a dining room table in the house, I loved it. And then I said to my parents, hey, can we set this up permanently? Can I make a town? Can I make all of these things? My mom said, yeah, we don't have the space. So that was one of those moments where it's like, okay, well, maybe someday we'll get to the point where we'll have a model railroad, and that time is now. I have little real modeling experience, and I'm saying that not only from the model railroading experience, but I only built maybe a handful of, plastic model cars when I was a kid, and didn't really do a whole lot over the last, I'm in my mid 40s now, the last 30 years or so. Um, I moved to Pennsylvania, and there it was great because there's a lot of Norfolk Southern in the area that I was in. So Elizabethtown is near Harrisburg, Philadelphia area, for those who are familiar. Really nice thing is that there's an Amtrak station right in Elizabethtown, and I could walk to the Amtrak station. So I took it to Philadelphia, New York, rode it home to Buffalo just for fun, and also took an overnight train going down to Sarasota, Florida, right? So it's kind of nice to experience that whole dining car, small room experience, even in the modern day. And of course, there's the Railroad Museum in Pennsylvania. It's in Strasburg, which I encourage all of you to at some point in time to take the trek because it's a really awesome museum. Moved to London, Ontario about 7 years ago, and I live within a little bit of a long walk, but certainly within a walk to the CPKC and CN yards. And as you all know, there's the Goderich and Exeter Railroad. There's also Ontario Southland Railway. And because I visit family in Saskatchewan, I get to go see the operation in Moose Jaw for the CPKC. So the reason why I'm walking you through this is because, while I've seen a lot of the prototype, it's primarily been in the modern day. And so that's probably the reason why I picked a modern era to model. Now there's some liberties taken because maybe some of the industries or the industry that's going to be the single industry is probably more tractor trailer served than it is rail served these days. But with some liberties, we say that there's a good marketing scheme, and this particular industry is going to be rail served primarily. So the space that I'm working in, there are limitations and advantages to every space. I live in a heritage home, which was originally purchased because my wife and I love the home. It's a beautiful space, and they had to have some renovation. But the basement space, which
You're muted, Aaron.
This sound is coming up.
okay, all good now?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so again, I live in a heritage home. The basement is relatively finished. It's dry. It's relatively consistent temperature, which is nice. There's the area that I'm working in is a 13 by 9 foot space, which is relatively large. It's not huge, but it's a good space. And the previous owner had actually done some concrete work to level it out, so it's quite nice for putting up bench work and so on. And of course, the lighting and power outlets are there, which is nice because older basements, they may be limited in that regard, but everything seemed to be quite modernized down there. Uh, Disadvantage is that there's not really a large garage or any space to be doing a lot of bench work. So I ended up buying some Seavers bench work to create a U-shaped single deck layout in that space. That's at a height of 48 inches, so relatively high, but not up to chest height or anything, but certainly nice to work with. And as far as anything that's going to be modeling, as far as the building of structures and so on, my partner and I share our second floor office, which I took from having computers and books and all that kind of thing on to now just a space where I can put my 1, 2, 3 blocks, glue, and all kinds of other things. So the first version of, so I knew that in that space, I was not going to be able to do, as William mentioned, the state to state, large, basement empire kind of thing. But because I was new to, even though I'd read a lot, I'd listened to a lot of podcasts and so on, and I knew that I wanted to be operations focused. I wanted to see what I liked in some ways with this first layout. So I decided on a single town, and I decided on CN because I liked a lot of the equipment that I saw when I went to the London East Yard. Really enjoyed, watching that particular operation and so on. I decided I wanted to see some 6-axle and 4-axle power on the space, and I'll get into why there were pros and cons of that in a little bit. And I like the idea of having a yard operation, and maybe again because I was spending a lot of time watching the CN operations at the London East Yard. And within the single town, there would be a lot of industries. So there's a list there, and I'll kind of show them to you in really brief detail. But the idea that there'd be a lot of different car types, a lot of different operations. Not every particular industry would be switched every day, but there'd be some variety to any given operating session that would occur. So I'm going to walk relatively quickly through some of the pictures I have of the layout because this is the old layout, and I'll talk about again the sort of pros and cons of this. So this is looking at one portion of the U. On the left-hand side, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor. Maybe you can. Actually, can you see the cursor now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I had two rather long tracks over here that were considered visible staging. So the idea is that you'd have, trains coming in, they'd back into the yard. There might be blocks of cars that were going to be pre-blocked for operations, or they might be, not sorted in any particular way. Then you'd have a yard switcher or local that was going to be doing any of the sort of sorting and movement of cars that were going to be in this yard that would be right here. You'd go up to the top here, and eventually there'd be a opportunity for you to come back. And there's an industry here, which was a big chemical industry where there'd be tank cars, there'd be box cars that would be going in and out for both bringing in materials for packaging, leaving materials would be like canned chemicals and the like. There might be other things like plastics coming in for packaging. And I really enjoyed this so much. And that's one of the reasons why I was thinking, okay, I'm enjoying just working this one industry pretty much all the time. Why not eventually consider the idea of having a single industry? So the visible staging is nice, but I never really liked it all that much because you're just sort of running the trains back and forth, bring cars in and out of the yard. it's not really as if you're watching the six axle trains go any particular place like you would in a much larger layout. Um, the yard was a decent size. It was nice because there would be space for sorting, there would be space for storage. Um, Depending on what you brought in and out and what you switched, the yard would certainly do its job. It's just another view of part of the chemical company that's here. You get a sense of the bench work and what it looks like, and these sort of carts in which I'd have cars that would be off the layout that would eventually get switched on and off of the layout from session to session. I have to say that I really love GP9RMs. They are probably one of my favorite locomotives. So this was the yard switcher, but also would go out as a local as well and switch out to the various industries. And this gives you a sense of the rest of the U, if you will. So this was that industrial spur going back to the chemical company over here. But then you come around, you'd have, this is a logistics company that's here. This is actually the original version of Prairie Grow Grains that's sitting in the back. Much more muted compared to what you will see later on. This is a municipal transload in which there'd be a whole host of different things that can come here, from box cars to these covered hopper cars. But again, this was just something that was kind of like well, any transload in which you could have a variety of things coming in. And then you've got a metals recycling company that's over here, right? So one of the really nice things about this was that everything was trailing point, so it's really easy to switch. There's enough space here that you could probably get two of these larger hoppers in here. So, there wasn't really anything too horrible about the space itself, but it was just too much in trying to do too much in a very limited space, in my view. I liked the idea of having a lot of open space, so that's why the bench work is kind of wide, so that you'd be able to have large structures and so on. You can see that my my particular scenery work is that of a novice, I believe, because there's not a whole lot of nuance to anything that's here, and I was sort of puttering around with what um, um, materials that I wanted to use, work with, whether it be the woodland scenic trees that you see right here, or ballast that's being used for gravel and the like. And there was a lot to be done with this particular layout. So again, just to give you a sense, like this is the original Prairie Grow Grains. You've got receiving for liquid materials here. You've got a area where you'd be doing some receiving, in this particular case, only of materials for packaging. And then you'd have grains of various sorts that would be coming in this particular end. Yeah, just give you a sense of the original version. So aside from being in a position where there were some operational likes and dislikes about this particular layout, had put already a fair amount of time and money into this particular layout. So one might ask, what was the catalyst for change? And the catalyst for change was a cold winter in which there was a pipe that actually started to leak that was relatively close to the layout itself. And the only way to get to it was to actually dismantle a portion of the layout to get to the piping. Again, this is one of those things where old house and everything was dry and lovely, but then needed to go and rip apart this particular layout, even though it was only about a year and a half old. So going to the point where, all right, what do I really want to do? And like I said, that chemical plant that was on the layout, I enjoyed just working a singular industry. And I really liked the idea of food processor and so on. So I went back and started thinking about, okay, where can I get inspiration? So took books off the shelf. We were talking about, various books that we all have, or magazines that we have many copies of. So, take a look at Tom Clancy's, How to Design a Model Railroad, or Lance Manheim's How to Design a Model Railroad, but also Tom Clancy's book as well, particularly to be working in a relatively small space and listening to, around the layout, second section, and the crossing gate for just, what are the things that I really have experienced in this first layout that I want to make the best part of the next layout. In these contexts, a lot of individuals talk about, oh, well, within this very large basement empire, there's this one industry that everybody loves to work, that could be a layout within itself, and could spend, you could spend 2 hours or more on that particular part of the layout in and of itself. So as an example of that is Tim Garland's Seaboard Central. So this was in Model Railroad Planner just recently. If you look at what Tim has put together so far of that layout, over here in this corner, he's profiled this single industry that's an ADM ethanol plant. The space itself for that plant is 8 by 2 feet plus a little bit of lead that comes over here. And so within this 8 by 2 feet section, Tim has talked about how it could be an hour and a half kind of switching between bringing cars in, having cars in the storage tracks, moving them over to the various corn delivery tracks or receiving tracks for distilled grain, not receiving, but filling tracks for distilled grain. And then also these tank car spots that are right here. So again, in this 8 by 2 foot space can have a lot of work that's done and can hyper detail a particular industry. The thing that really got me was when I started looking back through not the actual magazines, but the virtual track plans, if you will, that are part of Model Railroader. I came across this plant, which is the posterior plant in Battle Creek, Michigan. So this particular plant was really kind of at its height in the 1970s, where it was being switched by both the Grand Trunk Western and Penn Central. So there were upwards of 80 spots at this particular plant in their yard alone, and then many spots where you'd be receiving paper, cardboard, plastic, in addition to all the various types of grains, where you had white wheat, red wheat, rice, corn, oats, grits, bran, and then liquid materials, corn syrup or liquid sugar or bag sugar and boxcars, etc. Right? So here we have a singular industry layout, and an idea that was very similar to the idea that I would have wanted for Prairie Grow Grains in its first iteration, but now in its current iteration I'm working on. So there are examples of these single industry layouts and single industries within large layouts that are a great design for a single or a couple operators, and really can do a lot in that very small space as far as operations and so on. So this is where we get to the part where I'll go a little bit slower, because this is the actual version of the layout that I'm working on, and I'm probably, hopefully, as long as there's no pipes breaking or anything odd going on in my basement, we'll be working on for a while. So this particular industry is a single industry food processor, going to be bringing in a lot of the same materials and having a lot of the same materials leave as you would have had at that post plant, but just with modern equipment. So the idea is that we're saying that we're going to have a very high volume throughput through this particular industry. Again, it's using the same footprint as the first version because all the bench work I was able to save, just had to redo a little bit of plywood and build on top of that from there. Again, it's focused on work for 1 to 2 operators because that's really the space that I have in there. There are lots of car spots and very rolling stock from day to day. I'll talk a little bit more about the operation as we go. So one of the things that I wanted to eliminate was the 6-axle power because it just wasn't useful. So, I sold off those units, thankful to have Facebook Marketplace to do that selling, so that I could focus on having 4-axle power. And I wanted the 4-axle power not to be CN power, unfortunately, but to be leased power that would be, at the plant at any given time. I'm rotating some units just because it's kind of nice to have more than one locomotive available to you. And the idea that, every 90 days there would be an inspection for those particular locomotives. I still want to keep yard operations. So you're going to see a yard and it's going to have 2 divisions to it. So there's a fiddle yard, which would represent the exchange that would be daily for the industry itself with Canadian National. And then the section of it that I'll call the active portion, which is going to be where there's a bunch of sorting and blocking of cars needed for the day's operation. And there's potentially space there for storage if there are cars that would not be switched in that particular day. So I want to apologize right now because I switched over this PowerPoint presentation from my Mac to my PC that I'm on because I'm actually at work because that's quieter and more reliable maybe with internet. So this might be a little bit fuzzy and I apologize. But this is a quick outline of what the yard side of the U looks like. So here is this industrial spur, if you will, going to the CN main line that would be out here that, is just kind of through the wall, if you will, on the layout. There's a series of 4 storage tracks, which would be the fill yard itself. And then there's these tracks down here, which are going to be the storage tracks and also where you kind of hang out the switcher locomotives hang out between sessions. There's also a clean out track that's right here where boxcars make sure they're clean before you end up putting any sort of finished food product in there. So that actually adds some operations where you could say have a boxcar that would come into the fiddle yard or be at the fiddle yard at the beginning of the session. You might be bringing it here to the storage tracks because you've already got some boxcars that are sitting here from the previous session that could be used for loading out of goods. You bring them to the cleanout track, and then you have to bring them for the shipping portion of the building, right? So you got multiple moves within even just this side of the layout, which again, you do in sequence based on when cars arrive and what you need for that particular day and so on and so forth. So this is what that side of the layout looks like now. On this particular section here is that to the CN mainline kind of spur. You then come back in here and you've got the fill yard that sits back here and the tracks would be the storage tracks right here. And then this is going to be just in the view, the clean out tracks, which would be available for 2 boxcars at a time. I recycled a whole bunch of, you might remember some of these structures, just the idea that there's some background structures that are back here because that way I'm using the space that's still available because it's pretty deep bench work. And it's easier than just to be reaching and working with cars that are going to be in this section. To give you a sense of how many cars would be available to be in this yard. So this fiddle yard, if you will, we've got 4, could have 8. So 14 cars could be in this particular area. And the nice thing about the fiddle yard is that you vary it from day to day. So it increases the variety of operations because you wouldn't necessarily be getting, in this case, you have 4 hopper cars are here. You may not get any hopper cars a particular day. You might have a bunch of corn syrup cars, or you may have only box cars that are coming in for shipping and receiving of shipping of goods from eventually from Prairie Grove Grains, or could be incoming materials like paper, cardboard, sugar that's going to be coming in that way, etc. If you go further up the U, so if you go in this direction over here, you're going back towards that yard space. And if you go over in this direction, you'll be going around the base of the U, if you will. In this space, what I've done is I've put what would be, an office, a yard office, if you will, a maintenance building. And then as you'll see on the other side of the layout, there's again essentially a transload in which you might be taking finished goods from another part of the corporation, if you will, for Prairie Grove Grains. That might be flour, could be corn syrup. For example, there's this food grade trailer that's right here, and loading it out and sending it to another company, sending it to another subsidiary or another building, miles away for Prairie Grove Grains, etc. So again, adding some variety of operations to the layout itself. As we move in this direction, you'll see that there's less dirt, if you will, that's going to be around and less green because I'm moving from one section to another relatively slowly to start to, really get a little bit better scenery going. And there's still some things I want to work out that's going to be on the building side, if you will, or the real work side of the industry itself. In the back here, you can sort of see a sneak peek of the first building, if you will. And I think I just move. This is sort of the building's schematic. To give you a sense, the yard is over in this direction. You just saw, so these tracks right here go to these particular locations right here. So there are receiving tracks that you just saw. And then there's a shipping portion of that particular building that comes off of another section of track here. Along here, you'll see there's going to be another building, a very long building that's going to be the primary building for the industry itself. So again, very much like the post-serial plant, there are multiple buildings that would be served by this yard, multiple buildings that would be potentially producing varied materials from day to day or month to month, etc. This is a close-up of that first building. So this is just made out of scrap pieces from Walther's kits that I put together as a temporary space because I'd actually probably want to try and scratch build this at some point in time. Same thing with these particular buildings. I'm still trying to work out exactly what I want this to look at. But it's nice what you can pick up at, train shows, whether it was, I didn't go to Burlington, but at other train shows where you can pick up a Pike Stuff kit and then sort of throw some things together quickly to get a sense of what it would look like. But the idea here is that this particular building is the smallest of the buildings of the two. You're going to have some grains that will come in here, so dry goods here. Also some corn syrup or other liquid materials that will come in here. And this is a receiving door only for boxcars. So this would be things like, again, packaging, et cetera, that would come into that particular door. Over here is the edge of that building you were just looking at. So you come around a curve and you've got here the shipping kind of dock, if you will, for that particular building. So I'll blow this up in just a second, but just to give you a perspective of, we're looking at the far right of this building at this point right here. This right now is the version of the main building for Prairie Grove Grains. This you'll see is in red because that's the original building that was on the previous layout. So I just haven't painted it yet to make it something different. Still deciding on those sort of things. So again, this is the last building that you saw. This is going to be the shipping location. So again, these would be cleaned out boxcars that would end up here. This is also the shipping end of the primary main building. So really, this is all going to be outgoing goods at some point in time. This track in the center here is a storage track for cleaned out boxcars. So cars that have already gone through the clean out tracks, but they haven't been spotted yet at locations where they can be filled. So again, this has some off spots, if you will. And this particular track can hold up to 4 50-foot boxcars. So, twice through the clean out tracks, if you will. This particular location is in the center of the long Prairie Grove Grains building. So it is the packaging centerpiece, if you will, of the building. So right here in the center, you see that there are some storage silos for plastic pellets, or it could be wax. This was what was found kind of at the post cereal plant, where there would be packaging that would be for the materials that were at the post plant, but there were also packaging materials that were going to be created for the brand at that particular plant and shipped to other locations. So the idea is the same here, where you have potentially a plastic pellet hopper that's going to be here, packaging coming in here, or sorry, raw materials or paper coming in here, and then because this is the end, that's the shipping end, you could have materials that are going to be finished materials for the brand that are coming out in boxcars from this location over here. So again, this is a packaging central, if you will. To reorient you a little bit again, this is that shipping area here, and over here would be where you'd have the plastic pellet car that you just saw. But off of the runaround that's right here, you also have this transload that I was trying to refer to earlier. So the idea is that you'd have hopper cars that are going to come in here. Right now I'm keeping it dry bulk goods, but in theory you could probably I could probably create it so you'd have corn syrup or something like that would be shipped out in the trailers. And then you have this spot here where it's covered because we're in Canada and it snows a lot and so on. The idea that you'd be transferring goods into tractor trailers for shipment elsewhere. Yep. You've seen this. This is that plastic pellet car that you had seen a couple of slides back. Over here is going to be the receiving end of the industry. So as I blow this up a little bit more, this is where you'd have dry goods receiving. So again, you could have in the post-cereal area, or in my view, you could have seeds and nuts. And if you had packaged sugar in some other fashion, you could put it through that way. You could have dry fruit. You could have a whole lots of things depending upon whether you're creating granola or you're creating cereal, etc. These three tracks right here will eventually be covered. They're going to be the locations where there's going to be grain receiving. So again, in covered hopper cars, we've got a variety of different grains that could be offloaded. And the idea here is that there are going to be particular spots for particular grains because that way they'd be fed to their correct storage location. Right now, I have these two corn syrup cars spotted here. The idea that they'd also be sheltered and to be a little bit warmer. And again, you could be able to, in the wintertime, be heating these so that you could be able to have the corn syrup flow into storage tanks, etc. And there's also the possibility here of having, say, vegetable oil or some other compound that's going to be added at these particular car spots. So as you can see, as you go from the sort of yard side to this point, there's a lot of unfinished business. There's a lot of material that needs to be added. For example, last night I was working on this pike stuff, the shop's kit, so that I could have it be an example of, and it may be the permanent shelter for those hopper cars and corn syrup cars. So from an operations scheme, I'm, in some ways, in paying attention to, podcasts and reading of various books, and there's the OPSIG's materials that are available through the organization, trying to decide exactly what is the best way to run a single industry layout. Since it's going to be primarily myself and my wife actually enjoys doing the operations as well, working together, we could just make up some pre-made switch lists based on what's been in the fiddle yard, what's currently in the storage yard, and at the various industries, and just sort of have that done, make it on my computer, and use that and walk away. What I'd rather have is something a little bit more interesting of option, which is what I'll call a handmade switch list. So this would be a little bit more, I'll hopefully say a little bit more prototypical, but the idea is that you'd have a plant manager that's going to say, I really need to have these commodities at this particular time. And the question is, do we have those in the yard? They should be, because they should have been ordered. So you have a yard inventory list of what cars you have and what they're filled with. You'd have a pull list because you'd also know what items or what cars have actually been unloaded and are free to move, or loaded and are free to move. And then you have an idea of also what spots are currently open at the yard that the appropriate cars could be placed. And based on those 4 points, create a switch list essentially by hand as far as what needs to move from point A to B, B to C, etc. The nice thing about this actually is that not only could you be starting the session in that way, so you have your initial needed commodities list, but as time evolved and as things moved, you could have someone who plays the plant manager, if you will, and say, okay, great. This particular car has been there for, let's say, 15 actual minutes or 20 actual minutes, which would signify a much longer time period on a fast clock, and say, okay, well, that's been loaded or that's been emptied. And now you can move, and we still need these other items, and you can make sure you can move through as many items as possible that's available to you on both in both the yard as well as the cleanout tracks, etc. Right. So what's interesting to me is that within the OPSIG group and within what I've read so far, and I certainly haven't read model railroad or a railroad model craftsman back to the pre-World War eras. But I haven't seen a whole lot on, operations within the context of a single industry. Um, so, in some ways, this is making it up on my own, but I think it's somewhat would, realistically be what would happen in an industry at any given time. I'd also like to note that in both options, there could be loaded cars left over in the yard at the end of a particular session. And again, you would just take that into account the next time you're going to be setting up a fill yard in your next switch lists. Right? I haven't mentioned too much about, aside from William mentioning that it is HO scale, I haven't mentioned too much about, what am I using for a DCC system. So it's a Digitrack system. I've also bought the components for allowing you to have the wireless connection to the proto throttle, which is an expensive but fun toy and adds some, nice operations aspects to a single layout with only one or two operators that's going to be doing this particular work. So. And again, this is what was a little bit larger fleet has now been reduced to this nice lease fleet, which honestly is a little bit easier to handle. And, I think my partner's probably happier that I'm not spending as much money on thinking about locomotives and so on. So future goals, sharpening up the space. So the bench work is there, but I'd like to sort of make it, a nice space in the sense of having some black cloth or something to make sure you don't see the under wiring and other items that are going to be below the layout. There's going to be a lot of refining of operations. So the switch lists, I'm still going to be working that out, thinking about what's the minimum duration for car placement and pulling as far as that goes. And then the idea of priority rules. So there is just the idea of first in, next, movement, but there also could be shipments coming in that I don't have yet. That could be, say, modern refrigerator cars that have goods that need to be unloaded almost as soon as they come into the yard itself, and so those will end up taking priority. Scenery, there's a lot of stuff to do. I am a novice at all these things, so additional grass and trees, ballast and dirt, lighting and sound. So I didn't point out, but there is some lighting that I've hooked up that have been some Wooden Scenics items. I'd like to add more to the yard itself, particularly since I'd like to sort of simulate at some point in time either dimmed lights that are going to be, dusk time work or nighttime ops. And the reason for that is because if you look back at the post-serial plan as the template, it had multiple shifts a day and even overnight shifts. So it is a plausible thing that if this is even though it's a freelance industry, but if it has that sort of heft as a post-serial plant had, then there could be a potential of having 2, 3 shifts a day. And again, those would be mimicked as multiple day sessions on the layout itself, but under potentially different conditions. There are large structures to add. There's storage tanks to work out, another grain silo maybe. And then, of course, there's small features. There's a space that's a green area space that I didn't really show that's next to the first building, the smallest of the buildings that's served. It's really just a open space. And the idea that it's a modern world, that there'd be solar panels potentially helping to bring electricity into the plant and doing all those wonderful green things. And weathering, again, I'm a novice, so I haven't really weathered much at all, and I need to practice that. But once I get a little bit decent at that, start weathering pretty much everything because, not everything is shiny and new, even though it's working in the modern era and there's modern equipment. So, although I will say that the particular switchers that I showed you, every time I've seen a picture of them, the GMTX switchers just look like they've gone through the car wash, if you will, and they look, shiny and nice. So maybe I'll leave those. I don't know. And of course, we always look ahead to the next thing sometimes, even though I'm going to be probably comfortably working in this particular layout for quite a long time. But even though I don't have a basement empire, I envision this mass industrial subdivision as this proto-freelance division having multiple customers that would be served by CN. And so in the basement itself, although I can't connect the benchwork I have to this other space, there's a nice 16 by 8 L space that I was thinking of having a 2 foot wide at max, but maybe something more like 20 inches wide bench work that would allow for some other company. And Colden Metals is this idea I have. The name Colden comes from the town that I grew up in Western New York. But I would look at this, 5 years, 10 years down the road as a place where once I learn what I can and cannot really um, do a lot more scratch building, do a lot more without just kits, kind of make it more my own now that I'm sort of building upon the skills I've had, not only in layout one, but layout two. Um, so again, the idea that there would be some tie together of these, at least with the idea of this subdivision as a map and so on. So I went relatively quick. I probably didn't say everything I wanted to, and maybe said things that I didn't. But would like to thank William and Malcolm for inviting me to this group to give a talk. Again, very early days on this particular layout, in my view, and there's a lot to do, but hopefully give you a taste of what I'm thinking about with a single industry, where the inspirations came from. I have to say that there is so much that you can get, I think, with a large layout on a small one like this. All kinds of operations, all kinds of ideas of the beyond the basement kind of ideas from, um, that people talk about on a regular basis and so on. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, things I didn't go over, go back to slides, etc. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. We can take questions. You'll have to unmute yourself. You should be able to do that as appropriate. If you can't unmute yourself, let me know. Maybe it's a setting I've got wrong. I have one note for you, Aaron. Are you familiar with the beer line that the model railroader ran back in the 2000s?
A little bit, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah.
There's some good ideas there about operations, specifically in the what is it, the May 2009 version.
Okay.
You might be interested to review that.
Yeah.
You can't unmute. Okay, hang on a second.
I think
That's working now.
we can unmute ourselves.
Bruce, do you have a question?
No, it's just let them know that we can unmute now.
Okay. So, William, this is that moment at the end of a lecture in which you're not really sure how you did. So, thanks.
There. Are you using DC or DCC?
I'm using DCC. Yeah. So I wanted to, I figured I wanted, it's interesting because I intended to, be working potentially multiple locomotives at once. So I wanted DCC in the particular space that I had. And I also wanted to have all the bells and whistles of the sound, etc.
Yeah,
In theory, if I was just doing this, I might consider just a DC layout because, I may only be using one locomotive at a time, right?
right.
I think, I've been able to do this myself where you might have two two units that are going to be doing different work, right? So one might be doing the blocking and sorting of cars in the yard. The second is actually doing the delivery and movements of car spots that are on the main buildings. Um, that works a little bit, but it gets a little tight even with just two people in the space that I have. And that's again, it's primarily you know, because I initially designed it for having the extra tracks for visible staging, etc. I made the bench work really deep. And if I were to do it again, I would not do that. I mean, I would cut off probably a good 6 inches to maybe even almost a foot on that particular part of the layout where the yard is, so there'd be more space to navigate around each other. I'm not looking forward to getting a little older and getting portly and not having a lot of space to move around in there. So yeah.
Are you into any 3D printing at all?
No, well, yes and no. So I don't have a 3D printer myself, but I have done CAD work and I have so I mean I work just for everybody, it may or may not matter. I work at Western University and I'm in the Department of Engineering, the Faculty of Engineering. I'm a research officer here, I'm not a faculty member. Long story short is that we have lots of fun capabilities and various labs that have 3D printing that are as good as any of the commercial available, but then there's also development of even smaller than you could imagine. So I might see if I can test a few things with some of the faculty members to make smaller items and so on. So, but yeah, I'd love to. It's a part of the hobby that, again, having a little bit of background with the computer side of things that I would love to get into. Again, just have to find a space to put that 3D printer, which they're smaller now, might be able to figure something out. So. Yeah,
Yeah.
Bruce, I was just gonna
Sorry, go
say,
ahead.
Bruce, it's really fun. I mean, I even though it's been really quick to put together, I spent a number of many nights working just the track work to make sure that everything worked properly and to kind of go through my head rotations of cars and I made modifications to the track work already from the initial plan, and I'm still mulling over a couple things on that building side, which is one of the reasons why you don't see any scenery there, because I might
Yes,
pull
sir.
up some of the track and modify some things, both for realism, but also to
I know I've
enhance the
tried to reset it.
operations.
It should be
So,
available now.
but yeah, it is a lot of fun, and it's really easy to get lost for 2 hours. I mean, I think if you move at more prototypical speeds, it's not hard to get to envision a 3 hour session with all the car spots and so on, right? Um, yeah,
Aaron,
yeah,
can you hear me now?
yes, sir.
Okay, I just want to congratulate you on your layout. Are those scratch buildings that you have been building?
No, I mean they're all kits.
Okay,
So you
kids, but they're
know,
nicely assembled and good looking, realistic looking
oh,
buildings.
thank you.
Very
It's
good.
actually, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's actually one of the things I worried about is like, I getting things square, making them look nice, and the thing is making multiple kits instead of a single long piece of
Right.
balsa wood or something or whatever it might be made out of, right? So,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
good work. Will you be inviting people to operate, single operators from time to time?
I'd love to, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the only thing is uh so the answer would be yes, as long as you don't mind walking into a basement. That's the thing is
Right.
that it's an older house. It's an old basement. So if you can stomach that, then I'd love to have people come over and operate anytime. So yeah.
I'll be looking forward to coming there. Okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, you should be able to unmute now. Please proceed.
Mhm.
It's Philip Jago here. I was just thinking your idea is quite intriguing there. I live in the Ottawa area, but there are a couple of potential operations here that could be modeled. One of them is the ingredient plant, which was formerly Canada Starch in Cardinal. They've got about a 1 mile spur that connects the Kingston subdivision down to the plant that's located on the Cardinal waterfront along the St. Lawrence Seaway. So your moving starts in and out. A lot of tank cars, a lot of hopper cars. Could be the possibility for rail to water if you wanted to kind of stretch your imagination a little bit at the same time. There's street running through the town, so you can model the town as well. And they're quite the going concern. And hello, only with one switcher that seems to do the job. Ingredient shops this out to an organization known as Cruise, which has a very large 1,000-car yard just to the west of Cardinal for a variety of transloading and other types of operations. Canadian, or not Canadian Pacific anymore, Quebec Gatineau Railway operates a spur from the Lachute subdivision, Buckingham on the Lachute subdivision, up to a town, or Masson, excuse me, up to a town called Buckingham. It's about 4 miles long. And there they're into service a fertilizer plant called Urco. And there is one other customer there that they have. They also load hemlock logs for the United States, which is essentially a one industry operation as well, with a little bit of a trackage. And what makes it even more unique is there's about a 3.5% grade between Masson and Buckingham that they have to climb, and the rules are coming down. One load takes 3 empties to provide braking force on any of the movements to stop runaways.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, both of those sound awesome for potential single industry layouts. Or I like the idea that you've got, primarily, one big industry, and there might be this other one that adds variety to the operations, right? So, in this era of shelf layouts, I think this is a nice way to get people into the hobby. Both in the space constraints. Maybe you want to learn really well one particular type of operations, etc. And I like those 2 prototypes that, I'm already envisioning, very interesting ideas for the way the layout could be structured, etc. Right? Yeah. So because I go to Tilsonburg on a fairly regular basis, it's not too far from here. You've got companies like Future Transfer where there might be 2 rail served locations even within one town. So you might have a yard that's associated with that, but then you're going to just 2 different locations that could be on either end of the layout, etc. Right? And there you have boxcars, ammonia that's in LPG, tank cars, salt in old, beautiful covered hoppers that are the cylindrical hoppers because they're in their second lifetime, etc. Right? So. But very cool. I'll look into all those industries at some point, probably right after this meeting. So,
Any more questions for Aaron? Okay. I guess you covered it pretty good, Aaron. Thank you very much for your presentation. Much appreciated. We had 38 participants tonight, which is great. If anybody else is interested in presenting, please contact myself or William Waith. We're trying to coordinate things. We have speakers booked actually until April of next year, believe it or not. So that's really encouraging as well. Our next meeting is November the 11th, Cal Sexsmith, and he's going to be talking about the design and operation of the Parkland Division. And he says that the Parkland Division is a 24 by 24 HO scale layout representing the Canadian National and Canadian Pacific joint lines on Saskatchewan's forest fringe and parklands in the 1960s. Despite its reputation as a prairie province with vast treeless plains, Saskatchewan is over 50% forested. The forest fringe is where the farmland ends and the boreal forest begins and is located 250 to 350 miles north of the U.S. border. The Canadian Shield is another 100 miles to the north. The area immediately south of the forest fringe is known as the Parklands and has more trees and water than further south. So that sounds like another interesting presentation. We look forward to that. Also, if you have any topics you'd like to see covered, again, please get in touch with either Willie or myself. And I think that's it, unless anybody has anything else to add.
You realize November 11th, I'm going to be wearing a uniform drinking beer in the Legion basement.
Yes, I realize that.
So I give my regrets now.
I might have to move that one. No, I've got the wrong date. I'm sorry. November the 17th. Pardon me.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So you can
That's
make
good.
it.
Yeah.
Bring your beer with you.
Okay. Wear my artillery beret as well.
Yes, exactly.
12 years of undetected crime.
Yeah. So it's my apologies. It is the 17th, not the 11th. I should have known better.
Made me happy. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and hopefully we'll see you next month. And again,
Okay.
thanks for participating.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Hi, Grant.